Hey guys, so today we are going to be going over the subject of airport markings, lightings, and signage. And looking at this topic by itself does not really seem like a super interesting topic or something you might want to focus on a lot. But it's very important for us as pilots. Just kind of relate it to, just imagine you were driving down the road, didn't know what any of the lines on the road meant, didn't know what any signs meant around you, not even, what if you didn't even know what stoplights meant? Be very unsafe and also illegal experience. And that relates directly to aviation because knowing these signages and lighting and markings on the ground, what everything means, what you're required to do, it is very important for safe operations on the ground and is also, legally binding because if the FAA found out you were operating recklessly, not abiding by any of the markings or signage, and you caused an accident, they investigated and they were like, hey, you messed up, you're in trouble. So you just need to, for safe operations and also staying on the FAA's good side, you need to know what all this is. So first diving in, we're going to talk about the different type of airports because you can't have markings, lightings, and signage without an airport. So an airport, defined by the FAA, is it is any area of land or water used or intended for landing or takeoff of aircraft. And in simple terms, the FAA has determined that this grass strip or waterway or paved runway is, safe and legal to house takeoff and landing of aircraft. Airports have a combination of different informational navigational aids in the form of signage, markings, and lighting. And diving into this a little bit more, airports, the FAA has designated, there's 4 different categories of airports. You have commercial services, cargo service, reliever airports, and general aviation airports. Commercial service, they're publicly owned airports and they house at least 2,500 passenger boardings per year with a scheduled passenger service. This type of airport, if you think about commercial air travel, this is going to be pretty much where all these companies are operating out of. Next, you have cargo service, which means that this particular airport, the air transportation of only cargo with an annual landed weight of greater than 100 million pounds. Next, the relief airports. These are kind of smaller airports near these bigger commercial service airports that if the FAA needed to relieve this commercial service airport because there's so much traffic or there was delays going on with an emergency, they could send some of these to the relief airport to kind of let the load off of the commercial service airport. And then finally, the general aviation airport. It's pretty much the remaining airports in the U.S. They don't really have a designated cause or a use, but they're used for, just general aviation. Anyone flying around can go there and land and do pattern work and cause trouble. But any airport can actually be a combination. So as far as commercial service and cargo service, an airport can be both because a lot of these bigger Bravos, they house a lot of commercial travel, but they also house a lot of cargo services with air transportation package and stuff. So they can be either and. And so breaking it down even further, we're going to talk about different types of airports. Like if you're using your sectional map to navigate, you have 3 different main types of airports that are going to be listed on this map. You're going to have civil airports, you're going to have military airports, and private airports. Civil, you're going to be your general public operations. You can pretty much go there without any restriction. Military, operated by their government agency. This isn't a place you'd want to just go because it's illegal most likely and you'll get in a lot of trouble. And then you have your private airports, which are private owners, and they've said no, we don't want anybody just coming here to land. Let's show you all some examples. So any airport kind of listed on the sectional, kind of shaded in, it shows runway shaded in. These are going to pretty much be your civil airports. And then if we come over here, we have an example of a private airport. It's going to show the R for restricted, or it'll show private in the name. And then finally, you have your military airports, which are shown by the double circle right there. So those are the kind of designators on the sectional itself. Next, we're going to talk about towered versus non-towered airports. So a towered field Towered field has an operating control tower, and these guys kind of control the flow of traffic, ensure the safety of traffic as well. These are usually designated by the type of operations happening at the airport or the flow of traffic at that airport. So example for Lynchburg, we house regional, we house Piedmont regional traffic, and then we also have a pretty big flight school, so they have for towered field, and it really helps out with the flow of traffic, especially with all of us training here. Next, you have a non-towered field, which just is it's just kind of like your own little rinky-dink airports. There's no really controlling agency at the field. It's pilot responsibility to ensure the safe coming and going of traffic. So you'll use your CTAF frequency to communicate, Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. And even though it's not legally binding, radio communications are very important for safe operations here, because if there's multiple traffic in the pattern or multiple traffic coming and going and nobody's talking or listening to each other, there's bound to be a very bad situation. And just to show an example, on the sectional as well, when you look at these civil airports, you'll see blue and you'll see magenta shaded. So the blue ones, these are going to be your towered fields. So this is Lynchburg. So a lot of us know it's towered. Then you have magenta, which is your non-towered field. So you'll have a CTAF frequency listed. And in this case, 123.0 for your CTAF. That's the frequency you want to communicate with everybody else on. Now there's 4 different areas where you can get this airport information I've been chatting about. You can get it from the map itself. A lot of the airports will have kind of a little summary, have the name, things like frequencies, runway lengths, airport elevation, things like that. You can get them directly from the map. It's kind of summarized, a little quick little spout of the airport information. And then next you have your chart supplement, which supplements the sectional map you use for navigation. It goes into a lot more detail. You can see there's a lot more stuff going on. This is Lynchburg from here down as well. It talks about things such as phone numbers, runway dimensions, like specifics, phone numbers, services, fuel. There's remarks, because every airport has their little and special quirks, I guess. You have your departure frequencies, you have your radio aids, airspace information. So all this, the chart supplement is a good place to go if you're researching a new airport to go to. Shows a lot on there. Next, you have NOTAMs, which are issued by the FAA. They're kind of time critical, heads up kind of information. It's not sufficiently known in advance to permit publication. So if it's something such as an approach change or a map change, and they can't update it immediately because it's on this 56-day cycle, you need to put out a NOTAM for it, which stands for Notices to Airmen. And it's just saying, hey, heads up, this is changed, this is new, this is what you gotta look out for. It can also include taxiway, runway, airport closures, construction, things like that. So whenever you're planning a route, planning your airport, you need to definitely check the NOTAMs at the airport. And finally, you have ATIS, which is your Automated Terminal Information Service. This basically gives you your weather. There's different forms of this at the non-towered field, such as AWOS and ASOS. But they basically give you the weather informations. So you know what runways to expect and what the weather conditions are at the field. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and dive into airport markings. So markings, when I refer to markings, is pretty much gonna be anything painted on the runway surface. There's 2 main marking colors. You're gonna have white, which are gonna be a lot of the runway markings on the main runway itself. And taxiway markings are normally yellow. And I don't have yellow, so we're gonna use red for that. So we're gonna do a general layout of the runway. So I'm not an artist, so just be prepared. But we have thrown us a very crooked runway on the board right here. So this is our example runway. So let's just say you were looking up right above it and the runway is running straight up. We'll just say north, but yeah, straight up. So this is the end of the runway, runs this way. We're looking at it from an aerial view. So the first thing probably the most important thing on a runway you're gonna see is your designation marking. And this is gonna be basically the runway identifier. It's gonna tell you what runway it is. And this is directly reference to magnetic north and also your approach direction. So you can't really mess it up if you're approaching, if you're on the heading on this approach, you're heading towards the right runway. But it's just gonna be a big old white number in the center of the runway. So let's just say runway 6. We have a big old white 6 in the center of the runway. I believe you can see that right there. This big old white 6. And this is just designates the what runway it is, like I said. That's a little better. All right, and then next we're gonna have our centerline markings. So these are markings down the very center of the runway. They're uniformly spaced from dashes to not. And this basically gives you your alignment guidance whenever you're landing. You want to keep your aircraft aligned with the center of the runway as you're landing. So this gives you your line that you need to follow on the way in. Next, we have our threshold markings. So those are going to kind of be towards the very beginning of the runway. I'm going to go ahead and draw this for later. But then you're going to have your markings. So you have your threshold markings. They're going to be these big vertical white rectangles all across the edge of the runway. And there's two different types of runway marking configurations. Firstly, just any old runway, if there's nothing special really about it, what they'll do is they'll take 4, or a total of 8, they'll put 4 on either side of the center line and they'll evenly space them out. There's really no significance to them, it's just that's the number they picked. Or if it's a lot of this, like for instrument runways, they will actually take these bars and use them to kind of help with width identification. So depending on the total number of threshold markings, it will determine the width of the mark or the actual runway. So for example, let's just say I have 6 total here just because it's what I could fit right there. But if we went off the FAA's chart, 6 stripes would mean this runway is 75 feet wide. Here in Lynchburg, we have 12 stripes, which means we're 150 feet wide. So it goes from 60 to 75 to 100 to 150 to 200 feet. And it's from 4 stripes, 6 stripes, 8 stripes, 12 stripes, and 16 stripes. So it's just a little cool fact to know. You can look up the width on the chart or on the airport diagram and stuff like that, but it's just cool to know. Hey, you can use the thresholds to actually gauge how wide the runway is. Next, we have our aiming point markings, which also are known as the 1,000-footers. These are going to be your big white rectangles. They're going to be your big white rectangles, past the number, past the threshold, a little bit further down the runway. They're going to be one on either side of the field. These are going to be approximately 1,000 feet from the threshold. So this is kind of a standardized aiming point, so everybody tries to shoot for this for landing. It's just 1,000 feet from the end of the runway, and they're the big white rectangles on either side of the airport. Next, we have touchdown zone markings. So these are going to kind of gauge your distance from the threshold. They're going to go from 3 bars, 2 bars to 1 bar. So for example, between the threshold and the 1,000-footers, it's actually going to signify the 500-foot section, which will be signified by 3 dashes on either side of the number or either side of the field. This is not scale, of course. And then, so it's going to say, here's 0, here's your 500 feet markings, here's your 1,000-footers, which is also substitutes the next set of 3. But after 1,000-footers, you're going to have a set of 2 markings, and then a set of 1 mark. These are all going to be little white rectangles on either side of the runway. And this is just going to show your distance from the threshold. Let me get you. Let's see. So if you want to look on this picture right here. So we have our 1,000-footers. There's our 500-footers, but past 1,000-footers, you're gonna have 2 sets of 2 and 2 sets of 1. And this is gonna run down the runway, and these are basically 500-foot increments. So it's telling you how far down you are. So you'll be like 0, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000. So it'll run until 3,000 feet from the threshold. Next, we have our side stripes, which are basically, if you look at the edge of the runway, it will have white lines, and that's basically, that's the edge of your runway. It's going to have the white lines to kind of show you what the runway environment is. And so let's just say our runway actually had additional pavement next to it, but it was not used it's called the runway shoulder. It's not used for the run. It's not part of the. It is part of the runway. It's connected to the runway environment, but it's not part of the runway environment. So you cannot use it for takeoff and landing and things like that. That will be separated from the runway using yellow solid lines, and it'll just saying, hey, there's a yellow line. So anything past the yellow line is not for aircraft operations. All right, and we're gonna go back to the threshold a little bit. We're gonna talk about a couple different types of thresholds. So your normal threshold, usually gonna be the end of your runway, and it's gonna, end of the runway, big white blocks. But there is also a couple different kind of scenarios. First, we have a relocation of threshold. It's whether they might take the threshold and they might move it up. They might have to do some maintenance on the end of the runway, or the end of the runway is, the concrete become unusable. So what they'll do is they'll relocate the threshold. Usually gonna be temporary, but anything past the relocated threshold cannot be used for takeoff or landing operations. It's based solely just taxiing, basically. That's all you can really do. Next, we have a displaced threshold. It's gonna be a permanently placed threshold on the runway that's not at the end. So, for example, let's just say this. We'll go ahead and extend this runway. Extend this runway out. We'll say this is all like same dimensions, same looking pavement, but the threshold starts here, and there's no really runway environment markings here. But you have something like, you'll have a line of arrows and some big arrows in the center. And this is an example of a displaced threshold. We'll get into a little bit more of the types of pavement behind the threshold, but a displaced threshold is basically this threshold that has been established not at the beginning of the pavement. So it's saying, hey, the threshold is the first, this is where you can start to land. You cannot touch down behind the threshold. Just for a couple examples, let's see. All right, so when we're talking about the thresholds, there's a couple different ways they might set that up. Firstly, we have the taxiway leading to the displaced threshold. So just for taxiing operations, this cannot be used for takeoff and landing, only for taxiing. But if you see it look like this, the taxiway leads to this little section before the displaced threshold. This area you are allowed to take off from, and you are allowed to land from the opposite, or you're allowed to roll out from the opposite direction. You still cannot land before the threshold markings, so this is not for landing on this runway. But you can, once you pull out and get on center line right here, you can go ahead and apply full power and take off before you can go ahead and start taking off before you reach that threshold. Next, we're going to talk about some taxiway markings. Let's throw us a couple taxiways on here. We're going to go ahead and, all right. So we got our red taxiways. They're going to be yellow at the field. So first thing we're going to have is our taxiway center line. Now this is the line when you're taxiing the aircraft. This is the line you're going to be referencing and following. You want to stay on the center line to stay in the middle of the taxiway to ensure the most obstacle clearance on the other side. Normal, it's going to be a single continuous yellow line. And then there's also enhanced center lines, which they're mainly used for when you're getting close to the runway environment. It's kind of like a heads up to the pilots saying, hey, you're coming up to a hold short. You need to get your head outside, get your eyes outside, and be paying attention. And it's basically kind of like a warning, it's an alert. And it's gonna be when you're approaching the hold short line of a runway. The taxiway edges, not every taxiway is gonna have edge markings like here at Lynchburg. We don't really have, because the whole pavement is the taxiway. But when it needs to be defined, because it might have taxiway shoulders or pavement on the sides you don't want to be operating your aircraft on, it'll be defined as 2 solid yellow lines. So just for an example, let's just say this one's your normal taxiway. The edge of the lines is the edge of the pavement. You don't really have the lines. But if you needed the lines down here, we'll come down here, and it'll be a double yellow, and that'll show the edges of the taxiway. So if there was pavement past this double yellow, you do not want to be operating on the other side of that double yellow. All right. And also we have, as far as the surface markings go, if the taxiway marking turns into a dashed portion, like I've drawn here, let's just say there's a concrete pad out here to the side, and if there's a dashed portion, that means the adjoining pavement is allowed for aircraft operations. So let's just say you landed, you're taxiing back, and this is kind of like the parking area. This is where a lot of it is depicted as, separating from parking areas to the taxiway. So the dashed lines mean the pavement on the other side is suitable for aircraft operations. Now next, the holding position markings. These are very important markings. They're going to be located right here between the taxiway and the runway. They're very important because these are the lines that basically separate the taxiway from the runway. They're going to be 2 sets of double yellow solid lines. They're going to be 2 sets of dashed yellow solid lines, dashed yellow lines. And if you are on the solid line side of this marking, you cannot cross without clearance. If you're on the dash side of this marking, you can cross without clearance. It's kind of like if you're coming up to the runway, you're gonna have the double yellows. You need to stop. You need to get clearance. But if you're taxiing off the runway, there's no need to get clearance to get off the runway, because getting off the runway as soon as possible is great. Here's an example of a hold short line. Like I said, double yellow you don't cross, dash yellow you can cross. And this is also another example of enhanced taxi center line. So this is, as you're coming up to this hold short, it's saying, hey, watch out, you're coming up to something important. And also you got a few other things such as vehicle crossing. So if you had a vehicle specific roadway across a taxiway, it'll look something like this on either side, like the zipper effect. You can also have VOR checkpoints, which is going to be your big yellow circle with a black arrow. That's just where you check the accuracy of your VOR receivers. That's more of an instrument related concept. And then you also have non-movement area boundaries, which are going to be, they're going to be similar to hold short lines, but they're only going to be 1. So it's going to be 1 solid and 1 dashed, and it's the same rules apply. If you're on the solid line, you should not if you're on the solid line side of it, that side of the line is a non-movement area, but you do need clearance before crossing that solid line into the active taxiway. And then also for closed runways and taxiways, if it's permanently closed, they're going to take away all these like major markings at the end, such as the number, the threshold, the touchdown points. They're going to strip all that off the asphalt. They're going to put big old yellow X's and paint them. They're going to be either side and every 1,000 feet. Now, if it's only temporary closed, they'll usually pull out like this little trailer, and it'll pop up this yellow X with lights on it, and it'll be lighted, and that's for temporary closures, because they don't want to paint a permanent X if it's going to just be a temporary closure. So next, we're going to talk about some airport signage, and a lot of it, the airport signage is very important when taxiing. Airport signage also has some markings on the ground that goes with each other, so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Mandatory instruction signs are most of the time going to be a big red sign with white inscriptions. For a couple examples, you're going to have the runway holding position sign, the runway approach area sign, and the ILS critical area. These are going to be and no entry areas. These are going to be 4 examples of where these signs will be used. So first we have our runway holding position signs. So let's just say these are basically going to identify what runway you were at, or what runways you were at. So if you were at the very end of the runway with no other option, like if you were down here You can't turn to the left and take off. You can only turn to the right. It's going to be depicted by a single runway. So it's saying, hey, you're on this side. Oh, you're at runway 33, and this is going to be located on the left side of the taxiway. So it's going to sit on this side. It's going to say, as you look this way, you're going to say, oh, 33, and then you know that way is 33. But if it was a taxiway like in the center, it would show the both runways and the direction that runway is at. So let's just say you're looking at the sign. The runway 15 starts at the left, runway 33 starts at the right. We also have holding position for, these are for runways. So let's just say one runway intersected the other. You'll probably show up like even a taxiway. If your taxiway came up to two different runways, this just shows you the direction of the runways in reference to where you are. And then also, so if they had a taxiway like behind, so let's just say you had a taxiway come all the way down here behind the airport or the runway environment, it would also have its own hold short line with this, the 15 approach. So if this was runway 15 and you were trying to taxi across here, there'd be a hold short line right here for 15 approach, and that's just saying you're in the approach area of 15, and they want you to hold short to kind of, not cause any issues being in that approach corridor. And then another couple examples is your ILS critical sign and your no entry sign. Next, we have our taxiway location signs. So that's going to look like, it's going to be a black sign with yellow inscription. This is basically this is saying you're on taxiway Tango. These can also be co-located with the runway signs. So this is saying you're on Tango, holding short of runway 1836. And then also the same for runway identifier signs. If you're on the runway, you could also, you're on runway 15 here. It's just the black sign, yellow text is showing you where you are. And also going back to the runway boundary sign, it looks exact same as the hold short line, but this is going to be for pilots exiting the runway. This is going to be posted next to the taxiway identifier, and it's going to be whenever it's going to be painted on the ground as well, but it's also an additional aid. It'll be on a sign next to the taxiway identifier, and it's going to say, hey, once you cross the sign, you're clear of the runway because you're clear of the markings on the ground and on the sign. Then also you have your ILS critical area. It's going to be the ladder, yellow sign, black text, your ladder painted across the runway. ILS critical area, it's going to be something that you are instructed to hold short of. It's usually, controlled, or if somebody's on the approach, you're going to have you hold short of the critical area. And so you want to be on the opposite side. You don't want to cross that if you're instructed to hold short of it. Next, we have some direction signs. They're going to be yellow. They're going to usually designate a taxiway. So this is for like a taxiway intersection. It's going to show the taxiway, and it's going to show the direction. So the direction of that taxiway. So for example, if you zoom in on this little guy right here, so we're saying we're on taxiway Alpha, but as we pull up to this big wide intersection up here, it's going to show you from where you're located to what the taxiway's directions are. So, directly left to right is going to be Echo, but if you're going up to the right or up to the left, it can be either Tango or Foxtrot. So that just kind of gives you directions around the airport. And destination signs will also look the exact same. For example, this is a military destination sign. It's just saying, hey, this is the way to get to probably a military operating base. And then next we have, so if these destination signs can also be used for finding the runways. So if you were like at the ramp, for instance, this is basically telling you which direction to go to get to these runways. It could just show like one singular runway like this, but if it wants to show multiple, it'll just separate those using the dot there in the center. And then here's also a different example showing different taxiing directions for different runways. And then finally, we're going to have runway distance remaining signs. These are going to be posted on one or both sides of the runway. As you're rolling down the runway, you'll see these signs, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is basically, it'll look just like this, black sign, white text, and it's going to say, hey, this is how much runway you have left crossing that point. So if you're rolling down the runway and you see a 3, you have 3,000 feet more of runway. And it's just something important to keep in mind because, you want to make sure you don't run out of runway. All right, and then finally, we're going to talk about airport lighting. So airport lighting, first off, airport identification. You can use most airports will have beacon lighting, and it's gonna be a big old beacon. Probably it's gonna either be on a control tower or it's gonna be on its own little post, just really high up in the air. And as you're flying through the air, if you see these beacon colors, you can identify the airport. So your land airports, your normal civil land airports, are gonna be white and green. So it's gonna flash white, flash green. Your water airports are gonna be white, yellow. If it goes green, yellow, and white, that's going to be your heliports. And then if it's white, green, that's your military airports. So that's just kind of a good way. If you're, for instance, flying at night, you can identify those airports based off the beacon. Another thing with airport lighting, if you're flying at a towered field, lighting is most of the time going to be operated by ATC. You can ask them to change the lighting sensitivity if you need, but they usually just turn it on to a certain setting and leave it. If it's a non-towered field, the lighting is going to be operated by the pilot using a specific frequency. A lot of the time it's on the CTAF frequency that you're using, but some airports do have separate frequencies. A lot of the common ones that we deal with around here are going to be the 3, 5, 7 rules. So depending how many times you cue the mic, that'll set the intensity of the lighting at that airport. So 3 is low, 5 is medium, 7 is high. So first, we're going to talk about runway lighting. First, we're going to have the approach lighting system, which is going to be based off the approach into the runway. So if we extended this whiteboard down here, which I can't, we could draw some more lighting. But there's going to be a lot of different orientations of lighting. It's basically going to it's mainly used for instrument traffic, but it helps lead you to the airport. So if you're flying along and you see the approach lighting, you just keep following that lighting, it's going to lead you right to the airport. There's a lot of different types, so we're not going to draw them out, but you can look at the different configurations right here. You have things such as the ALSF 2, ALSF 1, you have Malzars, you have Oldals down here, the Malsif down here. It just talks about the orientation of the lighting off the approach into the runway. Another thing we have is our visual approach slope indicator or our precision approach path indicator. And these are used to help maintain a stabilized descent. They're based off of a certain descent rate, usually 3 degrees, but if a greater one is required, it will reflect that. Most of the times it's going to be over here to the left of the runway. And for example, here at Lynchburg on 2-2, we have what's called a PAPI system, which is the precision approach. It's going to show the dots, the 4 inline dots. Or if you use a VASI, there's a lot of different variations of a VASI, but it basically uses blocks. And when you're flying the approach, these are set at angles. So if you see, it's usually going to be like a red and white colors. And if you see more red, you're low. If you see more white, you're high. If you see equal of both, you're on the glide slope. So this is a good indication to help keep you on a steady descent rate. And it shows you if you're getting too low, which is very important at nighttime. Another thing we have are runway and identifier lights. These are going to be 2 big old white, kind of like strobe beacons. They're going to be on either side of the runway down here. It's basically saying it helps you identify the very beginning of the runway. Just like the threshold says, hey, you're allowed to land, starting here. These rail lights will say, hey, at nighttime especially, it's like you can start the landing after those big old white lights. Next, we have runway edge lights. They're going to outline the runway, just like the markings do on the sides. It's going to have their own lights. These are going to be usually depicted as white, except for in-spirit runways. They can be amber, or they will be white, but they will change to yellow on the last 2,000 feet or the last half of the runway, whichever is less. And also, when you get to the very end of this run, like here's runway 6, if you get closer to the very end, their lights will start to turn red to say, hey, you're getting close to the end. You need to make your decision now. We also have in-runway lighting. So this is going to be runway lighting that is in the pavement itself, usually on center line. But then you also have like touchdown zone and taxiway center line. But first, we're going to have runway center line lights. They're going to be white lights that are co-located with the center line. So a lot of this is good for nighttime operations because you can't exactly see all the white all the white painted lines, so it's going to show all your white lights down the center line. Touchdown zone lights, you're going to have 2 rows of light bars, symmetric. So it's kind of like these guys down here, this is the touchdown zone points, but they're going to be lit up red. We also have our taxiway center line lights. They are going to be green, which is a cool color. I have not seen those yet. But then it's going to be green taxiway center line, or you also have lead on and off lights. So the taxiways that are lead on and off the runway, if they're activated, they're going to be an alternating an alternating green and yellow light. This is part of usually like a more advanced taxi or more advanced lighting system at airports. And then also you have lasso lights, which are land and hold short. So if you had another runway kind of intersect right here, and they wanted you to land and hold short of that other runway, they can actually illuminate those lights, because there will be a hold short bar on the runway. They can illuminate those lights to kind of help you at nighttime to identify that point. And then another thing we didn't talk about, taxiway edge lights, those are going to be blue. So the center line is going to be green, the edges are going to be blue. And then also another thing, stop bar lights at the hold short lines that we talked about earlier. They can also, ATC at certain airports it's a row of red lights, and they can actually control if those are on or off. It's kind of like a stoplight, to relate it back to normal driving. If they're on and they're illuminated red, you need to hold short, but if they turn off, it usually means you got the clearance. But the big thing here is ATC clearance is the final authority. So if those lights turn off and you do not have clearance, you do not cross that line. And also, if you get clearance and the lights stay on, talk to ATC, say, hey, the lights are still on, are we good to go? Because they either forgot to turn them off, or there could be a malfunction, but you just do not want to cross that line without knowing 100% you were cleared to cross the line. And yeah, that's pretty much the gist of airport lighting. There's a lot of unique signs and markings and lighting at certain airports, but this is all laid out in the AIM Chapter 2, or you can also look in the PHAC. You can also look in the PHAC, I believe it's Chapter 14. Yeah, PHAC Chapter 14, and then also the PHAC Appendix C lays out the majority of the signs I talked about, so you can see all of them side by side. But it's just airport lighting, markings and signage. This is a very important, you need to become familiarized, but probably a big way we will actually learn to interpret this is through normal operations on the field. So if we continue to go out in flights and stuff, we can start looking at these signs and markings, and I can start asking you, say, hey, what is this? Hey, what is this? How does this apply to us? So it's something you pick up more, you can study, but it's more something you can more pick up as you're operating in the field and dealing with these on a day-to-day basis. Thanks, guys.